Welcome to the first episode of the new season. Colby Cohen and I are back. We are live. This is Morning Cuppa Hockey presented to you by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. So use our code DAILY365. We're pumped to be back here. We are now live every Monday through Thursday going forward for the rest of the season up until the playoffs, where we actually might do 5 days a week, including the Friday. So Colby and I are going to be in your face, in your ear every morning now for the entire NHL season. Colby, you fired up to be back or what?
I just want to correct you. Let's start this show off just like we finished last season. We will be doing 5 days a week during the playoffs. That is not a maybe. That has been inked, as we should say, that we will be bringing you 5 days of coverage a ways from now. I guess that wouldn't start until April, but we got a long ways to go. We got a full season ahead of us after a slow summer. I definitely could tell you I did not enjoy the recorded episodes nearly as much as I enjoy doing live episodes because we had no chat, and I feel like the chat, brings the juice, right? So good to be back for sure.
Yeah, and it is great to see the familiar names in the chat. We got Jeremiah, Olivia, as I open up the chat with the sound of my YouTube, still trying to get back into season shape here. Catherine, Chef Richard, J-Rock, all the familiar names that we became friendly with last year. It's nice to see everybody back here. We do have Frank Seravalli joining the show today, just like we did last season. So every single Tuesday, Frank will be hopping on. So I want to bring Frank on. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out to another sponsor of ours, Fountain Tire. This segment with Frank will be brought to you by Fountain Tire. Your family's safety is important, and you don't have to settle for a good deal or good customer service, because they do both. They'll treat your vehicle like their own. If you need new tires or your engine has a little rattle, stop into Fountain Tire and they'll sort you out. So save up to 25% off of select tires, including Goodyear, until October 10th. Plus, save another $50 more on any service of over $150, with some restrictions applying. Check out fountaintire.com, and we'll bring on our friend, our insider, Frank Seravalli. Frank, how you doing? Hockey season is upon us. What's up?
What's going on, boys? Yeah, good to be back. Let's do it.
Well, I think Colby has a bone to pick with you right away, by the way. So I think we want to hop right into that.
What did I do?
What bone do I have to pick with him right away?
You wanted to save it?
What are we talking about? I thought we were going to talk about Jeremy Swayman.
Oh, I thought you wanted to go into your little thing right away.
Well, this is awkward.
It's awkward for me too. Maybe Johnny, you're going to have to text me on the side, because I'm not exactly following where Johnny's going with this one. But since we have you, Frank,
so wait a second, hold on. Season 2, Johnny has supposedly grown up a little bit, and Colby's still changing his diapers.
Yeah.
I need him to text me so I know exactly what he's talking about, and then I'll pick whatever bone he means, Frank. But let's start with Jeremy Swayman, because this news yesterday, this was the first time in months that I got into Twitter. I was responding to people, I was putting my thoughts out, because this whole saga has been a saga. And I said a couple of weeks ago on the show, I was like, look, they're not that close right now. They are still talking amicably. And I said, things can change really quickly one way or the other. I said, I don't think he'll be signed opening night. That was just a prediction I made, Frank. But I did say that, in an instant, one side could decide we're getting this done, and it gets done, and he is playing. Now, yesterday, as everybody was aware of, this just took a turn for, to me, the worst. And I'm curious from your standpoint, Frank, taking everything that happened yesterday and everything that I know you probably already garner and know, what exactly is now going on with Jeremy Swayman and the Boston Bruins?
Well, you heard his agent in the statement yesterday, Louis Gross, say that they're going to take a few days to reassess. And obviously they're really disappointed by what Cam Neely said. And I think when you look at it from both sides' perspective, first off, to me, this really seemed like a tactical error by the Bruins. This felt like a team that was cracking under the weight of probably not having their future number one in net to start the season. There's obviously some frustration. And again, to understand it from both sides, I think they've moved a pretty significant amount. Now, I don't think that they put a $64 million offer on the table. In fact, my understanding is the Bruins have offered 8 years times 7.8 million, which is 62.4.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Cam Neely had a little bit of fun with numbers.
Rounding error.
Yeah. And look, again, 1.6 million, I guess in the grand scheme of the deal may not seem like all that much, but still $1.6 million is where they were off. And so if you want to back up for a second, I've been saying for weeks and or months that I think the Swayman camp has been asking for something in the neighborhood of 8 times 8.5 million, which is 68 million. And the Bruins were somewhere closer to 6.5. So the Bruins have gone from 6.5 to 7.8. They feel like they've moved a lot, and they probably feel like, and some of this is spitballing, me putting words in the mouth of the Bruins. They probably feel like, hey, we've moved a ton. Now it's your turn. And the fact that that hasn't happened probably and apparently has them frustrated. Now, from the Swayman camp perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I totally understand what they're feeling today, which is, wait a second, you're now attempting to bully my player and your player into signing a deal. You're attempting to change the marketplace's viewpoint of him, make him out to be greedy and selfish, and you're attempting to vilify this player publicly. If anything, and it's kind of sad because I enjoy the discourse and the back and forth, but this is an exact reminder of why NHL teams do not negotiate in public.
Yeah.
It happens from time to time in other sports. It's a pretty rare item in terms of the NHL. And so you now have both sides taking a step back today to reassess. And here's, you said take a turn for the worse. Here's my actual perspective on this. At this point, at least it seems like the bridge has actually been gulfed, or the gulf has been bridged, I should say, and that they will eventually get a deal done, even though it feels today like they're far apart.
Well, even with that, Frank, Boston only has 8.5 million in cap space right now. So how much higher can this offer even go? That's what I'm confused about.
Well, they'd have to obviously make some roster considerations, but look,
but until they do that, can they even get a deal done?
They can get a deal done. You make the roster move after the fact. You waive a player, whatever you need to do to get your number one goalie. Mm-hmm. I think if you need to sacrifice a fourth line winger to do it, you find a way.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
so go ahead.
Well, and what doesn't, and look, I think, from everything you're saying makes complete and total sense. And I actually was saying this yesterday, as like people are saying, oh, well, why do you believe the agent rather than believing the Bruins? Well, because again, I don't think Cam Neely got up there and lied. Cam Neely is a fiery guy, right? Like, I was in that organization. I've dealt with Cam. I've been around him. He's a very fiery guy. If you ever watch a Bruins telecast, especially in the playoffs, and this team isn't playing well, you see Cam Neely throwing things in the suite. Yeah. Acting very, very emotionally. And it's actually the complete opposite of how Don Sweeney does things. Now, look, Sweeney still sat up there at that press conference and partook in it. But what I don't even understand, Frank, is like, you're still a week away from opening night and you're naming Joonas Korpisalo the starting goalie for opening night. Like, I think that flew right over everyone's head yesterday. If Jeremy Swayman decided last night at midnight he would sign their offer, you can't tell me he wouldn't be starting on opening night. That, to me, is such a PR move by Jim Montgomery. And they made a decision as a group.
It was a coordinated attack yesterday.
That's what I'm saying. They made a decision. Okay.
And to be totally honest and candid, even if Jeremy Swayman signed today, I still don't think there's enough time to ramp up to have him start game one against the Panthers for their banner raising 1 week from tonight.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't agree because I think he's been taking shots. He's been skating. He's been on the
totally
ice,
different than
of the
playing in a
junior
game.
club.
It just is.
I understood, but you had time you had plenty of time between now and opening night. This was all part of their attack, and I don't understand. And the one
I
thing
love, by the way,
address,
that the media went down to Korpisalo after this press conference, and they were like, "Hey,"
he's like, "I haven't heard anything."
Yeah, I don't know what you guys are talking about.
The last thing that I want to say and I want to address, and I've seen this comments now in our chat, I got them all day on Twitter yesterday, was this whole Louis Gross didn't tell his client about an offer. That is the most, tell me you have no idea how this works without telling me you have no idea how this works, okay? That is not the case whatsoever. I've personally known Louis Gross for 20 plus years, okay? Louis is one of the guys that actually does have integrity in this business. There are plenty that don't, but you can't not tell your client an offer. That doesn't happen. Like people just assume, oh, with Nylander, he didn't tell Nylander how much the offers were, blah, blah, blah. Like that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And
these guys actually have a fiduciary responsibility.
You'll lose your license within the NHLPA if you do something like that. And again, I have personal experience. I do. Louis and my agents were partners. He's been on a negotiation. I've been in one with him. I've known him for 20 years. Like when I see that, it just tells me how out of touch people are with how these things actually work. So if you're one of those people that thinks that, you're reaching, you're grasping at straws.
Yeah, there were a ton of screenshots yesterday on Twitter that I saw of people like blaming Louis Gross for not sharing things with previous clients.
See, that's the unfortunate part of what Cam Neely did with the tactical error that he made. Is now
everyone can
your
speculate.
fan base is starting to turn against your player, and that was by design because what they're trying to do is pressure him into signing. Again, they feel like they moved. They have, but only to a certain extent, and that's not 68. Minus 62.4 is still a pretty sizable gulf. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not leaving $5.6 million on the table just because the Bruins want to make me look like a bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's still $5.6 million. And by the way, there's still an Igor Shesterkin deal that might materialize before opening night that then could potentially paint this negotiation in a totally different light because it might reset the market. But taking a step back and looking at this holistically, I think Don Sweeney has played it correctly. I think his even though he did show that he was flustered a little bit at the opening of training camp, by going after the Spit and Chicklets guys, but he framed it the right way, which was, hey, I'm confident that we'll get this guy signed before December 1st. And then you take a step back and you go, December 1st, that's like forever away. What do you mean we're not going to have this guy signed by December 1st? And you plant the seed of doubt in the Swayman camp's mind publicly that, hey, they're going to play hardball here. They're going to have you sit out all the way until December 1st if that's what needs be to get a deal done. But when I look at this from a holistic viewpoint, 30,000 feet, the biggest mistake that the Boston Bruins made was not, some would say, it's not getting a deal done before the Ullmark trade. I would say it's actually not taking Jeremy Swayman to arbitration. Because all arbitration does is set a deadline to get a deal done.
Mm-hmm.
Which is how these people operate. On
and that's what they needed was really, I know they went through the arbitration process previously 1 year ago. I think the player didn't love it. And the player was actually the one who had elected, if I'm remembering correctly, to take the Bruins to ARB to produce a deal. This time around, it's not, hey, Jeremy Swayman, we want to take you to arbitration because we want to grind you out on a 1 year deal or a 2 year deal. What we're trying to do is just set a 2-week deadline to get a deal done so that we can head into training camp with our team fully intact. And that to me was the big mistake. They just compounded the error this time around by cracking at a press conference on Monday.
Yeah. And the other thing too, as far as this whole relationship goes between players and agents, is the other thing, like, I think people need to understand is good agents do not tell you what to do. They don't. They create a relationship with the client and then they present options and they'll come to you and they'll say, look, if you sign this deal, or if we look at this team, here are the pros, here are the cons. Like, Their job is to paint a picture for you and to sit down with you. And I'm not even kidding, right? When I signed my first contract, we literally sat down and made a Venn diagram chart of the pros and cons between staying and leaving. Okay. There was no push. There was no, oh, my commission's going to be higher if this or if that. And I understand that any contract I sign is not even close to the magnitude of something we're talking about with Swayman, or we're talking about Willie Nylander when he did his deal. But agents present information for dollars that you've earned as a player. Agents don't get you contracts, right? Like, they help get you what you've earned as a player. So again, like,
here's the other fun fact is that most players end up taking way less than the agent thinks they could ultimately get, because no one wants the friction.
Exactly. They don't want to wait.
But Colby, that's a good point, because another side of the argument I've been seeing and hearing yesterday and in previous days is that Swayman has only played 132 games in the NHL and has basically split the net in all 3 of his full seasons in the league. He played 10 games in his first year. So it's really been 3 full years that he's been an NHL goalie. Does he have the right to be doing this with his experience? Like, that's what people are saying now too, is who the hell is this guy to be sitting out this long begging for more money when he hasn't really had that much game experience in the NHL?
But we see that again, all over. We see that all over the NHL. Look at these kids now that are, instead of getting a bridge deal, are getting an 8-year deal after playing 70 games in the NHL. Like, this is becoming very, very common, Johnny.
But you don't think it's different with goalies, because goalies don't play every game?
I'm just listen. Yeah, but
look at Dylan Guenther. He's played 78 total NHL games.
Just got an 8-year deal in Utah. Yeah. Like, this is becoming increasingly normal to give guys massive deals before they've even got through 250 games in the National Hockey League. Like, it's becoming, a totally different thing. And here's the last thing I would say is that, this deal, let's say it gets done at $8 million, because I personally believe that's the number that ultimately the Swayman camp would say, okay. I believe if he gets that 8 times 8 number, I think that the pen is hitting the paper immediately. So you're right.
See, I would say that might have been the case previously, but not after you embarrassed him.
Well, but here's the thing is, I don't know that like, to me now, when you just had your entire upper management, including the president, the owner, and the head coach sitting at a table, turning you into what they're making you seem like, I got to tell you, like, I'm thinking long and hard if this is a place I want to play. Like, honestly, like, I don't know if Jeremy Swayman, because here's the question that I have for you. If you now sign a deal in a week, if you're the player, Frank, let me ask you this question. Put yourself in his shoes. Are you going to sign that contract and then go and be like, oh, I love these guys, everything's good? Or is it going to sit in the back of your mind, all the things that they just said about you to the entire National Hockey League?
I think it's just part of the deal. Like,
but
you just got the deal.
We're talking about
you
a
grinded
human.
To get the deal you wanted. That was your choice. So you could have buckled, you could have folded long ago and taken less. Here's the other part. The Bruins aren't used to this. Look at what they've gotten Pasternak for twice now. Look at what Charlie McAvoy signed for. I'm not saying they're discounts, but I'm saying, like, the Bruins aren't used to having a real struggle on their hands and being strong-armed.
Well, they're just Marchand held out of camp at one point early in his career.
Marchand is maybe the most underpaid player in the NHL.
I know. I'm just saying. Like, he held out of training camp at one point.
Was insanely underpaid. Pasternak is still underpaid.
What does Pasta make? I don't know off the top of my head. Do we
tell you? Pasta makes
11.2.
Yeah, 11.25.
But so when he signed that, like, wasn't that pretty much like the market? Well, I mean, wasn't that, you feel like what he should have been in the 12s? I mean, even McAvoy, when McAvoy signed his deal,
he only signed it last year, and like Mitch Marner was making 11 way before. Pasta was a 50 goal scorer, 60 goal scorer by that point, and 113 points.
So he's probably, you think, should have been paid 12 and a half, 13 million.
He should have been in the 12.5, 12.6 range.
And
my point is, the Bruins aren't used to this. They're just not.
Because Don Sweeney's done a good job. I mean, like, you have to give Don Sweeney some credit there. He's been doing this for 10 years now. We're talking about a decade's worth of contracts where everyone's like, holy shit, how do the Bruins always get this done? Well, Don Sweeney's good at what he does. I mean, look, this is a
obviously
guy that
Louis Gross is good at what he does. What I'm saying is that this is out of the ordinary for them, and they're acting up because they don't know how to handle it.
All right.
That's just the truth.
Just to kind of put a bow on this conversation, because I know there's a couple other topics we want to get to, Frank, before we let you go. When Swayman and his camp come back in a couple days, they said they're going to take a few days to reset. What do you think the messaging is going to be? And do you think it's more likely than not that he is a Bruin still?
Yes. I certainly think it's way more likely than not. Again, given the gulf that we just talked about, unless he turns around and says, I'm not playing for you anymore because you embarrassed me, my guess is the bond that he has within the room with his teammates is way bigger than whatever the management team thinks of him in this very moment. And obviously, at the end of the day, they really value him because they've still put up $62.4 million to sign him. So don't get twisted in the war of words. Don't let emotion get the best of you. Take a step back and realize the leverage that you just gained by this outburst, which is the Bruins want to get this done. They're flailing, and that press conference just cost them a few more $1 million.
Yeah, that I completely agree with. That 100% did. And it brings me to a point, and I think I said this on Twitter yesterday. This is why you let your GM do their job. This is why, you have the guy leading the negotiations.
This is why you have one voice speak for the team. Don't sit there and let the messaging be consistent. This is like a PR 101 lesson is, even though you're the boss, even though you're the president, don't speak out of turn. And certainly if you're not trying to negotiate in the public, which they weren't, you don't just start throwing out numbers, let alone ones that aren't true. If you're going to come out guns blazing, your information better be irrefutable.
Well, because now, the deal at basement is 8x8. That's the basement starting point.
And that's what
now.
I'm saying. Why would so if you're the Swayman camp now, why would you turn around and sign 8x8?
No,
no. Now it's 8 times, at the very least, 8.25.
Yeah, and I saw Jim the Swede said that in the chat, and I agree. I think that would be the right number, and I think 8.25 for Jeremy Swayman is a team-friendly deal. I really do. With how good we've seen him, I think it's a team-friendly deal. Frank,
this is my own personal philosophy, though.
We have different philosophies on goaltending.
Which is, I'm not paying any goalie in the NHL, no matter how good they are. I'm not giving them an 8-year deal. Right. I just don't believe in the position.
Well, I think the Florida Panthers would feel pretty good about what they're paying their goaltender, because he was the difference in Game 7 last year when the game was on the line.
The first 4 or 5
but when the game was on the line,
I'd say he was the difference in the whole series too.
In Game 7, you had a goaltender at the other end of the rink that let in goals that, again, not bad.
That's the worst contract signed in the NHL.
Think about Game 1.
I completely disagree with you, because they have a Stanley Cup and people sell their souls to win Stanley Cups. All right, let's move on, Frank, because there is one other topic. There is one other topic, and now I know what Johnny was talking about. I didn't realize. I had no idea what he meant at the time.
Well, I thought you wanted to start with it. That's why.
No. But we're going to talk about him now, because we've vehemently disagreed on this months ago, and I've been watching this unfold, waiting to be able to talk to you live about this, Frank. And that is Mitch Marner. Okay. And the Mitch Marner situation. And look, you and me argued about this. And I said, this is way more complicated. This is not an easy transaction. And I don't foresee anything getting done. And you yelled at me and told me I was crazy. You said, this is an easy transaction. The player will get traded. And here we are. You yelled at me.
I don't yell at anyone.
We got into it on this.
Greg, I personally don't remember this, but Colby, I know, keeps receipts.
More than we usually do. We disagree a lot, but we really disagreed on this one. So,
well, would it be fun if we agreed on everything?
Of course. And where do we sit with Mitch Marner right now? Because, there's
going to be idiots saying Marner for Swayman probably today.
Where are we with Mitch Marner? What is the likely outcome of the saga that is Mitchell Marner?
Well, that part I can't really handicap of what's the most likely play. I mean, there's a couple different paths here. And I don't think any of them involve a deal at the deadline. But it's either the Leafs get really cold feet at some point this season and say, oh my God, this guy's having another 99-point season. We can't afford to let him walk, and they're just going to step up and pay him. And I think that would be the biggest mistake they could make. Or they're going to say, no matter what, no matter how good he is, no matter what kind of success we have in the playoffs, this guy, we're going to let him walk. How many other possibilities really exist? Play through the season and then trade him before he becomes a free agent for his rights? A sign and trade? Also kind of unlikely. I mean, he has complete control is the other part of this, and he has it all the way through until July 1. So my understanding of where things were back in June and maybe even the first part of July is the Leafs quietly investigated the trade market, found that while there were a number of teams interested, nothing that they could get in return, given the contract that team would then have to sign Marner to, really excited them in a way that they said, hey, yeah, we're actually making our team better in the here and now. That there was never anything to go to the Marner camp and say, yeah, this is what's on the table. Let's try and find a way to make this happen. Let's try and find a way to convince him to move. It never got to that point. So what we have is Mitch Marner in camp without an extension, and it's going to be a fascinating season for a player who is feeling the pressure as much as the team is, because it's one thing to go through all of this and feel like the spotlight is on you, which he has felt in the playoffs, but it's a whole other beast to do it in a contract year where you feel like you deserve a raise when you're already paid a premium salary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think it's going to be a story to pay attention to, but also with the Leafs, there's going to be so many other things that happen. Like Nylander's injury now is a topic of conversation. I feel like the Marner thing will be put to the back burner at some point of this year.
Never.
You don't think so?
You guys are asking me about it on day one to start the season.
Well, only because Colby wanted to dunk on you. That's the only reason why.
No, because it's the biggest, it's a massive elephant in the room in Toronto every day.
I think Tavares might be bigger. A bigger elephant in the room.
What, how so?
Just because what are they going to do with his? I mean, what are they going to do with him? Like he's
just going to take a huge haircut and pay and stay.
You think so?
Yeah, he's made a fortune. He's the captain. I think he doesn't probably want to move his family again.
And he wants to win. He wants to try and find a way to be part of the solution. If he goes from 11 to 5, I wouldn't be shocked.
Interesting.
Now, let me ask you this, Frank, and I know you got to go here, so this will be my last question for you. When it comes to Marner and Tree Living, because it's not his deal, because it's not his draft pick, do you feel like as a manager, there's less, like if Marner walks, it's less of a bundle on his part?
It's not a bundle first off, I don't think it would be a bundle at all.
I do, because how do you have a player that good that you recover zero assets for? Like zero. You've invested millions of dollars. You've invested time. You've made him a part of your core. For him to walk with no return, I think that's a bundle. That's my opinion.
Okay.
And so but do you feel like if I'm not going to ask.
Part of it is he would be absolved from, because his predecessor gave out the full no move, no trade. Like if ultimately a deal can't come to pass and they can't trade him, then it's not really on him, because it could have been blocked at any point. Right? Am I wrong?
No, he does have full control, which was our, why we went into this earlier in the summer, that like this guy can literally say no to anything and just walk into free agency, and every player gets more than they should in free agency. Like that's how free agency works. To more dollars. We said this about Shesterkin. Shesterkin wants a UFA extension. Jeremy Swayman wants an RFA extension. There's a difference. There just
100%.
is, based on leverage. So Frank, I know you got to go. Johnny, you got one more here. He's got
No.
1 minute and then he's got a buzz.
I'll let you go free, Frank.
Look at
First,
you.
All right, so
first
look,
episode of the year. We'll let him off the hook.
Every Tuesday, we're going to have Frank. Patrick Maroon will be with us once a week. That day is going to change based on the Blackhawks schedule. But we do look forward to having Frank with us every week, keeping us up to date on things that are going on in and around the league. There is a lot of buzz early in the season about things that are going on. So, Frank, we'll look forward to talking to you next week. I know your show, Daily Faceoff Live, starts on October 7th. Is that the correct?
Yep, next week.
Opening night, Frank and Tyler will be back every day at noon on the Daily Faceoff YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We have a bunch of new shows. We have a bunch of new content. The network is growing increasingly year over year. So, Frank, it's good to see you again back in your home office. We know hockey season is around when we see Frank in the home office. So good talking to you today, Frank.
See you guys.
Thanks, Frank. All right, Colby. Good start so far to the new season. A lot of good intel on Jeremy Swayman and everything going on around the Boston Bruins from Frank. But now we got a lot of other things to get into.
Let's just wrap that because there are other things that I know we wanted to talk to Frank about that I do want to just talk about between you and I before we do move on to some of the injuries and some of the discourse around the preseason that we're starting to see. And I know we want to get into that, but I guess, for me, Johnny, I know you don't like when I call you John, sorry. I'm curious from your point of view, because you are a Rangers fan and we know that you cover the Rangers and you are a Rangers fan. Does any of this make you uncomfortable when it comes to Igor Shesterkin, when you're seeing how, let's just call it a stubborn team versus a stubborn agent? Because I do believe that you're dealing with a similar situation. I think Chris Drury is a guy who is very confident in himself, not afraid to dig his heels in. And, you've got Igor Shesterkin and the Dan Milstein team, the Gold Star, I think is what they're called. They also seem very willing. They're watching this situation happening. So, I see New York Marine, all caps, giving it a big no.
Yeah.
Chris Drury will never air it out like that. I totally agree with you. And I will say this, I'm going to defend Don Sweeney here. Don Sweeney never would have aired it out like that either. He never in a million years would have done that. I spent years with him as my boss, playing hockey. And we didn't have the greatest relationship, but I do very much respect Don Sweeney and the way that he operates. I believe that he's a pretty honest guy as far as this business goes. And I don't think there's a lot of them. So does this make you uncomfortable as far as Igor Shesterkin and his future on Broadway goes?
No, not at all. I think this is a totally separate issue. And we've talked about this, I feel like, for weeks, but if anything, we won't hear anything about Igor Shesterkin's contract talks because that's how Chris Drury operates. You don't really hear much coming from the Rangers. But again, these are totally different situations. Like we've said, Igor's a UFA, Jeremy Swayman's an RFA. As the year progresses and we get closer to the deadline and there's no deal, then maybe there'll be a concern, especially if the Rangers aren't in a playoff spot. Then you kind of scramble and panic a bit. But until that happens, there's no reason to panic right now. Let Igor, do his thing, play well, have a good start to the year. And I'm not going to be nervous, I feel like, until deadline time comes. And then that'll be full panic mode if there's no progress toward a contract. But like we've been saying this whole time too, I don't think Shesterkin signs a deal until Swayman's deal is done. And I don't blame him for waiting. There's no reason for him to rush. So until we see Swayman sign his contract, I'm not going to be worried or be panicked at all about Igor Shesterkin.
But I'll push back a little bit on that. And I'll say, look, if Jeremy Swayman is aiming for an 8.5 number, and I know Igor Shesterkin is a better goaltender with a longer track record and more conference finals. But
well, that was a comment too in the chat that we had from a 2-pad stack that Igor Shesterkin should be the one resetting the market, not Jeremy Swayman.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that statement. But if Jeremy Swayman gets $8 million, or $8.25, does that make Igor worth 12? Is he worth $4 million more per season? Is Igor worth over 8 years, $32 more million than Jeremy Swayman? I don't know. That's where I would say, Johnny, is I don't know how this whole waiting for Jeremy Swayman thing actually pays off, because it's like, I'm just not sure the delta is that big. I do think there's a delta. Like, I do think if Swayman gets 8.25, Igor should maybe get 10.25, right? Maybe we're talking about, $2 million a year over 8 years. So maybe $16 million, but 30 plus million more than Swayman. I don't know if I agree and think that he's that much better. What do you think?
Well, it's a good point that you make too, because we spent a little time, not a lot of time, talking about how Swayman's only played 132 games in his career. Shesterkin's only played 213. Like, Igor hasn't really been in the NHL that much longer, but it feels like his experience is that much bigger just because he's been to 2 conference finals in his, in the last 3 seasons. And it feels like he's just taken on more of a load than Swayman has, because Swayman split the net with a Vezina Trophy winning goalie. Like, that's something that just makes this narrative a little bit different, even though the experience and games played really aren't all that different, despite the fact that, if you remember correctly, I mean, most people do, Ullmark was the Bruins starting goalie in the playoffs 2 years ago, I guess now. Swayman only got that start in Game 7 against Florida. Ullmark was the guy until then.
Well, but they should have that was the criticism. Yeah, but they should have rotated.
But this was Swayman's first playoff.
You're right. But let me tell you something.
Yeah, he was great.
Recency bias, man. I mean, players get deals off recency bias all the time.
But back to your original question, I think Shesterkin is worth more because of his 3 postseasons and his 3 years.
and UFA. I hope everybody, and I see New York Marine, Vic, maybe you could throw New York Marine's comment up on the screen about the UFA aspect. Is that it's a good point, because in free agency, you're getting more, right? When you're looking for, and that's what I said. When I said that Igor Shesterkin is looking for a free agent contract, not an unrestricted free agent contract versus a restricted free agent contract. That's what I mean. Like, Igor Shesterkin's like, look, I could go to market and be a UFA after this year, where I might get, a team might give me $13 million a year, $14 million. You just don't know. In UFA, there might be a team that's like, hey, we're about to build for the future. The Chicago Blackhawks might say, we've got more cap space than we could know what to do with. Here you go, Igor. Because in 3-4 seasons, the cap's going to be at $125 million, and $14 million is not going to look that ridiculous, right? So Igor is going to get a UFA type of deal, where Jeremy Swayman is getting a massive deal, but it's an RFA type of deal. If Jeremy Swayman was a UFA, somebody would pay him $10 million a year. Somebody would,
probably more. Probably more.
I would. And that's the thing. And that's where Frank and I totally disagree. I'm willing to pay one of those star goaltenders, big dollars. Now, there's only like 5 of them I'd be willing to pay that to, but of those 5, I'm giving them the bag. I really am.
Also, one more thing to add too. You look at the Bruins decor, I feel like, versus the Rangers decor. Boston's had a pretty good blue line in front of their goalies always. The Rangers D, I mean, there's been so many games. Last year, obviously, Swayman bailed them out a little bit in, that Florida series, I want to say. Toronto series, maybe a game or 2. But Shesterkin, I feel like, for the most part, has carried the Rangers to where they've gone to.
Yeah, listen, Shesterkin's been the best goaltender in the National Hockey League, individually speaking.
But he's also gotten shelled. He's gotten shelled. I don't think that happens really to Boston. And Boston's decor this year, I mean, they're going to be one of the stronger decors, I think, in the league.
Who, Boston?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, but you don't know how Mason Lohrei is going to look. This is coming up on his sophomore season, and you never really know how a guy's going to look in his second year. I think Zadorov was overpaid. I really do. I think he had a good playoff run, and we're talking about a guy who's traditionally played on a bottom 4 role of a decor. He's never played number 1 minutes. You still got Andrew Peeke, scheduled to play in your top 6, who played really well last year, but his career tells you otherwise. And then you have Parker Wotherspoon, who, again, he did well last year. Like, give these guys credit, like Peeke and Wotherspoon. But when you have a large body of work and then you come in and you do really well in a small sample size, I'm not saying that I doubt a player in that situation, Johnny, but what I'm saying is I want to wait and see more, right? I want to see him do it. I want to see Peeke. I want to see Lohrei, and I want to see Wotherspoon, and I want to see Zadorov.
Yeah, but you're leaving out Carlo and Lindholm. Like, those guys are great.
Listen, Lindholm had a bad year last year, so he's going to need to rebound. They've got my favorite defenseman in the National Hockey League, and Charlie McAvoy. I mean, listen, I'm not discounting him, and they're big. And I think Mason Lohrei is a talented kid. Like, I believe in him. All I'm saying is I want to see larger bodies of work before I anoint this decor that they're going to be like a studly, one of the best decors in the NHL, because of the reasons that I just listed. And I think I'm being pretty reasonable as I go through their decor, and I don't have it pulled up on dailyfaceoff.com, and I could,
I have it.
Scroll over to my computer. But I just think that you start looking at the Rangers decor, and like, the Rangers decor is pretty good. It's not as big and as heavy, but it is still pretty good. I mean, you can't forget the fact that you got Adam Fox. I like Keandre Miller. There's plenty to get excited about. I still think that, you're talking about a better goaltender. And then, when you have a guy like Ryan Lindgren in New York, who's always injured, you never know who's going to play on that top pair. It does throw a little bit of a wrench into things.
Well, I'll say what we said prior to recording today, or prior to hopping on. Colby said, tell me one thing surprising about the Rangers in preseason. I was like, well, they're trying to figure out who's going to replace Ryan Lindgren because he got hurt. And Colby just goes, I told you to tell me something surprising. Lindgren being hurt is not surprising, which I thought was pretty funny. That was
it's a shame. It's a shame. It is a shame. And
he did it in a fight in preseason. Like,
so you hope. No. I mean, what I was asking Johnny, and I said to him, are you watching a lot of preseason hockey? And he said, really just the Rangers. And I said, what, has there been anything that's been surprising? Have any guys stood out that you didn't think would? Before the regular season starts and we start arguing about, the fact that Lafreniere is going to be the #1 center for Canada at the Nations tournament. I'm sure that's coming. But that's how he responded, and that's where we went into that. So let's now move along. Let's move along into the second part of the show that we have scheduled here, Johnny.
There are a lot of injuries to talk about, and you can rank them. I don't think we're going to do that on which one's bigger, which one's a bigger loss for their team. But I think universally, everyone has to feel horrible for Patrick Laine and the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, there was a great quote actually that I want to read yesterday from Marty St. Louis, just talking about how important it was for them and their job to make sure that Patrick Laine was happy coming to the rink. And yesterday, Laine was on crutches at practice, smiling, looking cheerful. But this was the quote from St. Louis that I thought was really powerful. When you're rebuilding, like you're building a house, the house could look really nice, but is it a home? It takes more to make it a home. And I feel like seeing Patty coming in like that makes me feel like we're building a home. And that's really just him talking about Patrick Laine being excited to be a part of the Montreal Canadiens and everyone in that organization excited to have him. And obviously it's so unfortunate that this injury did happen. He took a hit from Cedric Perret, and it looks like he could be out for 4 to 6 months. But, we can get into Arbor Jacki too, standing up for him.
When you say it looks like he's going to be out 4 to 6 months, did he tear his ACL? Like,
that's just what the assumption is. I haven't seen a specific detailed part of the injury. Maybe someone in the chat could help us if they've seen that.
Yeah, I haven't either, which is why I asked you. And I think this leads to, sort of the discourse that I've now seen because, Drew Doughty, he fractured his ankle in an awkward fall in a preseason game.
That was just a weird, that could have,
there's been a couple of other guys that have suffered some injuries in training camp. And I think what I'm starting to see people ask is, should there be less preseason games in the National Hockey League? I think most teams are playing about 6 preseason games. And people are, Reinbacher was the other one who was injured in Montreal. In Montreal. Thanks for that reminder, Jeremiah. But look, I would say I have mixed emotions on limiting games in preseason, because I do think a big part of preseason is giving young players an opportunity to show what they can do. And for me as a guy who, made it to the end of training camp every year, and then either got to hold on for a couple of days until like my first year, Adam Foote got healthy, and then I got sent down to the minors, or, just getting sent down on that last cut day. Preseason was everything to me as a young player, getting an opportunity to show that I belonged. Unfortunately, it didn't really end up working out as far as cementing myself onto an NHL team throughout preseason when given, some pretty good opportunities. But I do think that you need to have preseason. You need to give vets maybe two games to start to get their timing back and get into game shape. And then I think you've got to give young players a chance to show what they can do. So I don't know. Like, I think
the perfect example of that is Zach Benson last year, first round pick, 13th overall, has an unbelievable training camp and preseason. He makes the Buffalo Sabres in his first year. Not to cut you off, but he's just like the prime example, I think. And Benson is an effective, impactful player for Buffalo going into his second year.
Yeah, look, it's important. It really is. So I think that, again, like you have to provide these opportunities. And what I was going to say, there's rules with the NHL Players Association about how many hours you can spend at the rink every day. I believe it's only 3. There's rules about how much you can put teams on the ice in training camp, mandatory days off. Like, I think training camp has been, kind of neutered down, to be honest, from what it used to be. I mean, I remember as a kid being at Flyers training camp. Roger Nielsen, the late Roger Nielsen, and my dad were very good friends. And so I used to kind of get, as an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, maybe around that age, I'd get to kind of spend time at the Flyers training camp and be in the locker room and go on the ice when guys were done with players and whatnot. And I mean, those training camps were brutal compared to what guys really go through now. Like, you have your skating test and your conditioning tests or whatever, and then you're talking about one practice and a workout basically every day. It's not a crazy lift where you're murdering guys before the season starts. So I see a comment from Angelo in the chat: instead of 6, would 4 or 5 be reasonable? Yeah, look, do I think 5 games would be reasonable? Yeah, sure.
But also the main NHL staples are playing like 2 to 3. They're not playing all 6, but also, Colby, a guy that we could talk about too, which like was a concern. Now it's okay. Philip Hedl was a guy too, who like needed to get preseason games to ramp up for the season, even though, he did get hurt and won the second one, but then ended up coming back in the game. But he's a guy who needs these games under his belt.
I see some comments that I think are really reasonable comments in the chat. Val said, but now players are in shape all year. There's no need for training camps to be insane. Agreed. I agree. Guys come into training camp in shape. And I saw another comment that said, they used to use training camp to get in shape, right? Yeah. Like, that's not the case anymore. But I will tell you this: no matter what you do in the summer, no matter how good of a group you have, no matter how good you could be with the Crosby group out in Vail, Colorado, you could be with the McDavid group in Toronto. It doesn't matter.
Nothing like game shape.
Nothing like game shape.
Nothing
like game shape, and nothing like training camp where you start to really battle guys, and you start to do like physical tight area types of things, which the whole game of hockey is played in really small areas. So as much as I agree with all of your guys, comments in here, I do think some of that stuff is important. Now, one thing that I agree here, Matthew Film Project said, I do think they should limit travel in training camp. I think what teams should do is maybe go play a series. Like, if you're Dallas and there's nobody near you, maybe you go to Colorado for like 3 or 4 days and you play 2 games in Colorado, and you basically hold training camp for 2 or 3 days in Colorado, right? So you're not going back and forth to Colorado, back from Colorado. You're flying on game days, which is different than in the regular season where you're going in, the day before. So all of those factors, I do think, come into play. And I see John saying 2 preseason games is enough as the regular season is already too long. Again, I think 2 preseason games, two preseason games is fine for a veteran player who played a full season last year. But I think you have to, again, see other guys. This is a major evaluation. Plenty of players look great in drills, and then they don't look good in games. You need to give people an opportunity, in these position battles and to look at, different things. So,
and again, vice versa, there are better game players than practice players,
Yeah. And I see Neil neutral sites as well. Like, I think neutral sites are great. I just think that they're difficult when they're not set up to house multiple NHL teams, because I've been a part of neutral site games. I played in a neutral site game my rookie year in camp in Colorado. We played the LA Kings at the MGM Grand in Vegas. This is before the Vegas Golden Knights existed. And it was a shit show. Like, it was a total shit show. The ice was horrible. There was barely enough room in the locker rooms. Like, it was not a good setup. I know the teams didn't like it, other than the fact that we basically got a team building trip in Vegas. That part was awesome. My first NHL road trip experience. So, those are all very reasonable things to say. Injuries are going to happen no matter what. They can happen in the summer. They can happen in training camp. They happen during the regular season. There's no way in a game like hockey to fully protect against injuries.
Yeah, and that's what Val just put in the chat as well. We just need to accept that guys get injured. It sucks, but it happens. Like the Drew Doughty injury could have happened. That was such an awkward play. Like, that could have happened at any point. It's almost like these things are unavoidable. The Laine one is a little bit different. The Laine one, because it's a guy who's not going to make an NHL roster, throwing a hit on a guy who's definitely locked into an NHL roster. But again, like, what is Parlay? I believe that's how you pronounce his name, Cedric Parlay, supposed to do?
What's he supposed to do? Just let him go around you?
Yeah.
Like, you're trying to make an NHL team. Again,
but that's the argument. It's like, where do we draw the line?
It's horribly unfortunate, right? But like, I'm not going to sit here and paint that guy out to be this total villain. Because again, you're trying to make a team. You might drop your gloves. There are different ways where you're trying to stand out as a young player. And I saw somebody say that the Edmonton Oilers have to play 8 preseason games. Yeah, 8's too many. I agree, 8's too many. The coaches probably don't really love that either. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if anything changes in the next CBA. I know that those conversations are going to start having to happen over the next couple of weeks, and we'll kind of see where that goes, because I think there is definitely a sentiment of people that do feel like 7 and 8 preseason games is too much. I agree. I think 6 is probably the right number, but I could easily be convinced that 5 is the right number. And I see the Flyers in Boston playing a lot in preseason every year. You see the Washington Capitals and the Flyers, the Islanders. Like, just stay within your little, corridor of teams, especially if you can. So you're limiting putting guys on a plane.
Yeah, and I just want to address Jeremiah's comment in the chat. Sounds like Doughty's going to be back mid-season, whereas Laine's injury is going to be way worse. Once again, you'd rather break a leg than damage a knee or get a high ankle sprain. And just to allude to that a little bit more, we will be doing our Pacific Division preview tomorrow on tomorrow's show. So we'll talk about how Doughty's injury affects the Kings and what to look for in that division. So just wanted to give a little preview for that on what's coming tomorrow. Obviously, this week, next week, we'll be doing a lot of divisional previews as we lead into the game starting. Although there is a meaningful game on Friday. The Devils and Sabres are in Prague. So the NHL season technically does start this Friday. But we will, go into all that as we progress here along the week.
Here, can I just, one more thing about Laine? Until we fully know what the deal is, we should stop putting the guy out for the year. Okay. I mean, all I'm saying, you're not the only one doing it. Yep. I just think let's have a doctor or a team come out and say, this is what the injury is. I saw him on crutches. It sounds bad. You never know though. You just never know. Right. So let's just wait until we actually know before we're, putting Laine in a coffin for the rest of the season. Yeah. I mean, we're reading his him out of this NHL season. So John Gibson, he had an appendix issue. He's out 3 to 6 weeks. He's a guy that we've now been hearing is going to get traded for the
10
last
years.
couple of years.
Yeah,
you guys know I'm a fan of John Gibson. I
Yeah.
think him at $6 million. I think there's teams out there that would really, really do well with his services. He's been in front of like the worst decor in the NHL for I don't even know how long.
He still has 3 years left on his deal, though.
But I do think him being out for the next 6 weeks certainly does not help if those conversations are being had.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing just to hit on before we kind of get into the end of today's episode. The Philadelphia Flyers, close to you, Colby. A lot of excitement in their preseason. Matvei Michkov looks unbelievable. And, Sean Couturier comes to his defense in a preseason game to have a fight, drop the gloves after Michkov was cross-checked, right in the face. But you love to see this stuff out of Philadelphia. Michkov has scored a couple of nice goals, an overtime winner, jumped into the glass celebrating an empty net goal in one of the preseason games. But have you been seeing anything coming out of Philly, talking to Danny Briere at all? There's got to be a lot of buzz, I imagine. There's been a lot of nice Torts quotes as well about Michkov.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you love to see Sean Couturier, who's not a fighter. You like to see him, getting involved. I do expect a big bounce back year for Couturier. I do. Last year was his first year coming off of missing 2 years with injuries. So I would expect he probably had a really good summer of training, feels really good. And I do think things are going to go well for him this year in Philadelphia. I definitely expect a big bounce back. As far as Michkov goes, look, I'm sort of pumping the brakes. I think it's pretty obvious that this kid has some real offensive talent. And I think it's great that Tort seems to be saying the right things publicly. He does seem to be hitting a lot of the right notes with things that he says over the last couple of seasons in Philadelphia. Although sitting Couturier, I still believe was, a massive mistake and a massive miss. But here's what I would say about Michkov. I think we're going to have to be patient, and I think you're going to see flashes of offensive brilliance. But I think that you got to remember, we're talking about a teenager who's never played in North America before, coming out of the KHL, again, struggled to play on his team in the KHL. So he was loaned out to Hockey Club Sochi. So look, is his offensive instinct, Lehigh Valley is going to hit so different with Michkov, and we're all going to hate Torts again. I don't foresee that happening, New York Marine. I think that he stays in Philadelphia, but again, I think there's going to be growing pains. I think people need to be patient with him. Preseason hockey, and something I've said on this show before, and I'll say it again, every week of preseason or every 3 to 4 days, it goes up a level. It starts with a lot of American League players, and then it finds its way up another notch, and then it's another notch, and then you get the roster down to about 26 players, and then it really gets close, and then it's the last game of the preseason. It gets a little faster, and then there's a pretty big difference between the last game of preseason and the first game of the regular season. Players are getting more physical. Players are getting, their timing back. So again, let's just be patient if you're a Flyers fan with Matvei Michkov and not expect him to come in and save a franchise that has been drowning for years on a team where, they don't have insane offensive talent. They've got guys who can make plays, Morgan Frost, Joel Farabee, Travis Konechny can score goals. They've got players, they're starting to, come out of their shell a little bit with that. Their goaltending situation is, somewhat unknown. They've got Fedotov, and then I'm drawing a blank on the kid, Sam Urison, and then the whole Kozlov situation is playing itself out, I guess, here in Philadelphia as well. Now that he's finally joined, I think he played against the Islanders last night. But with Michkov, Johnny, as I'm sort of circling the wagons on this a little bit, I would say patience. This kid is going to be a good player, but thinking he's saving the Philadelphia Flyers franchise on opening night, you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah, but also the funny thing about this too, or maybe the ironic thing, is fans, I feel like every time Trevor Zegras or, someone does like a little trick shot or a cool play to score a goal, everyone's like, oh, I wonder what John Tortorella would have to say about that. But here's the quote that Tortorella had on Michkov, which I feel like people wouldn't expect, because I think day one of training camp, Michkov attempted the Michigan, and people, like, the camera like panned towards his face or whatever, and people were like, "Oh, he's fuming." But this was the quote.
I think he was laughing.
He was laughing. He was laughing.
He was laughing.
So here's the quote: "We are starving for the type of plays he can make. I don't want to overload him. I want to let him go. I don't want to stifle his creativity." So this whole Michkov-Tortorella relationship is going to be pretty funny, I think, throughout the year. If he does try some fancy shit, like, I think Tortorella is all for it, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I think, look, there's going to be non-negotiables with Torts. And I think, there's going to be non-negotiables with a lot of coaches in the National Hockey League. And I think as long as Michkov is, making sure that he doesn't forget about the non-negotiables,
playing responsibly.
Exactly. And not even playing responsibly, because there's going to be some high risk to his game. But, like, let's talk about, playing through guys. Let's talk about back checking. Let's talk about changing hard. You've got to be able to block a shot when you're in the lane. You've got to make sure that you're staying within, somewhat of the defensive zone structure that's been put in place, and not just flying the zone looking for breakaways. I'm not saying that he is doing that. I think with Torts, as long as this player stays above the puck, and as long as he's not cheating for offense every time he's out there, I agree. I think his creativity, which is what you've seen in training camp, his ability to find plays, his ability to move and create space for others, his ability to seam past guys on the power play, these are things that are natural to him. And I think that are things he's going to figure out rather quickly in the National Hockey League. But again, when you're playing against defensemen that can skate as well as you can, that are big, strong guys, which is what you're going to start seeing opening night, well, we're going to see how he reacts. And that's why I think people need to be patient. I think they need to give this kid a little bit of time to adjust to the National Hockey League's strength, speed, the ice, how tight the game gets within the NHL. I do know in the KHL, they did shrink a lot of their ice surfaces, so they're not playing on those massive Olympic sheets anymore. So he does have some North American experience as far as ice size would go. But ultimately, we'll see what happens. There's definitely going to be quotable moments. There's no doubt about that.
And what I will say as well, after such a dramatic year last year, I feel like for the Flyers, it's nice to have a player, and just even more than Michkov, just a lot to be excited about for them. They created some momentum last year, and hopefully they can build on that this year. We had a great interview with Scotty Lawton this summer, so we're rooting for the Flyers, pushing for the Flyers. We'll probably try to get Lotz back on maybe during the season at some point if he's willing to. I see
a comment from New York Marine. Imagine being the Habs and not taking Michkov. Sergei Bobrov is constantly wrong about his Euro players. Well, what about Demidov? I mean,
he looks sick.
Demidov is, although his last 3 or 4 games in the KHL, his minutes have been under 10 minutes. He's not, early in preseason, and then maybe the first game or two, he was pulling off those highlight reel plays. And now I think he's settled into more of
I saw a nice backdoor tap-in from your boy in his first game or second game.
Who's that? Tony
DeAngelo.
Oh, he scored in his first game in the KHL.
Well, no, Tony gave Demidov a backdoor tap-in. Nice.
Okay.
Nice play.
All right. Nice. Yeah. He said he'd love to come back on and tell us about the KHL at some point after a month or two. And I think the KHL is such a big mystery to hockey fans.
Yeah.
We kind of hear stuff, but then you don't really know what to believe and what not to believe. So we'll definitely have Tony on to hear about the KHL experience. That's something.
Two of my former teammates at Mercier's from the KHL right now.
I'm really interested in hearing. Who's that?
Joe Duzak and Derek Barach.
Where do they play?
KHL. I couldn't tell you. The only team I know is Ska. I don't know any other team. And maybe that's actually the only team I really know, I think. I don't really pay attention to the KHL, to be honest. Maybe that's a flaw on me.
I don't. I see things on my X timeline, and that's kind of the I'll pay a little bit of attention to see what type of numbers D'Angelo's putting up, but I'm not looking at box scores every night, and I'm not tracking scores in that league. I never have really found that to be that useful.
I don't even know how to pronounce this team name. Vic actually just looked it up for me. Duzak plays for Sharapovitz Severstal. I don't even know where or what that is. But he was my roommate at Mercier, so I probably should know and follow a little bit more. I just see like the clips on Twitter and Instagram that are posted, but that's really about it.
I bet you they're making good money.
Well, Joe is nasty. He was like 4th, I think, in points for a defenseman 2 years ago when he was in the KHL. But if you remember last year, we talked about him on our show because Joe is the guy who chirped the Marlies bench and then Kyle Clifford jumped him and he didn't fight. That was my roommate, Joe. So shout out to D-Bag.
Apparently you keep similar company to how you would be on the ice.
I don't chirp though. I make friends with people on the ice, and I don't.
You go up to them at the face-off circle, and you're like, "Hey man, take it easy on me."
What's up, buddy? Follow me on Twitter.
Oh, I'm gonna be a creator when I'm done playing. So follow me.
But let's get into our last segment of the day. We're already going a little bit over time today, just like we always do with this show, because we can talk for hours about hockey. But it's time now for our bet of the day, presented by Bet365. And because the bulk of this show was mostly about the Boston Bruins and Jeremy Swayman, we're going to talk about the Boston Bruins over under 99.5 points for the season. Vic and I are leaning under. Let's hear your thoughts in the chat, whether you think it's going to be under or over. Colby, what do you think for the Boston Bruins this year? Do you think they'll have over under 99.5 points? Just for clarification, last year they had 109. And as everyone knows, 2 years ago, they set an NHL record for the most points in the history of the league. So this will be the first time in quite some time that they go under that mark. What do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what. If Joonas Korpisalo is their goaltender, I feel pretty good about the under. The question remains, though, is where do they go? And, how long does this Jeremy Swayman saga continue? Looking at their lineup, Lindholm, Coyle, Patra, and Beecher down the middle. They're expecting that Justin Brazeau to kind of have another building type of season. DailyFaceoff.com has him currently on the third line with Patra and Frederick. That's a pretty heavy line. Obviously, Patra is not super heavy, but Frederick and Brazeau, Morgan Geekie, Charlie Coyle, Marshy on the second line. You've got Lindholm up top. I think I'm probably going to go with the under, John. And only based on the goaltending situation, because as of right now, Jeremy Swayman does not play for the Boston Bruins. And with Joonas Korpisalo and Brandon Bussey as your two goaltenders, I don't feel great about them going over 100 points. I really don't. Now, what do we say the cutoff will be for the playoffs? Because what is the cutoff normally? About 90,
94, maybe
94. So I do see them as a playoff team. I just don't know. Are they going over 100 points without Jeremy Swayman? I don't know. Because here's the thing. I'm not 100% convinced that the Jeremy Swayman thing now gets settled. Honestly, I think it was interesting that Frank kind of poo-pooed me when I said, put yourself in his situation. Would you feel good about signing a long-term deal in a place where the owner and the president and the GM just put you on, put your feet to the fire like that? I don't know. I don't think it's a slam dunk that he ends up a Boston Bruin now. He very well could just say, I'm not playing here. You're going to trade me. And this could get really ugly really quick. He could also sign in 24 hours. The Bruins could now come back with their tail between your legs and say, look, here's 8.25 times 8. Let's put this to bed. So I'm going to go with the under on that bet. I don't, I didn't know that's what you were planning on asking me. So I'm working through it in my head here as we're talking about it. But yeah, I think I'll take the under there.
Didn't check the rundown?
I don't read the betting section because I thought you were taking care of that this year, but per usual, I do all the heavy lifting around here.
No, it's a conversation. But if anything, we'll get into our Atlantic Division previews probably next week. I imagine we'll go from west to east. And I'm just going to say that I think Boston, if anything, is a wild card team this year. But I'll leave it at that. We can talk about it more.
I guess Boston should feel really good about that because you're normally wrong. So I guess Boston will probably win the entire Eastern Conference, maybe even the President's Trophy.
Now all of a sudden, the hot fucking pick everyone's taking is I didn't mean to curse, excuse me, but the hot pick everyone's taking is Ottawa to make the playoffs. I'm seeing that all over Twitter now, and I was on that last year. Now all of a sudden it's the cool thing to do is take Ottawa to make the playoffs.
Well, you were certainly wrong last year. We know that much. So Johnny, so tomorrow's Pacific Division. Give us like a rundown. Then what are we going to do Thursday?
Yeah, tomorrow we'll be doing the Pacific. Thursday we'll be doing the Central, and that'll be it for this week's show. Then next week, probably at the top of the week, we'll do Atlantic and then Metro on Tuesday.
So Atlantic Monday, Metro Tuesday, and then we're at opening
night.
Well,
Wednesday is opening night, so that's the perfect. Although again, there are games this weekend in Prague. The Devils and Sabres are playing 2 games on the 4th and 5th to kick off their seasons in Prague.
One is an exhibition, and then one is a regular season, right? Or are they both regular?
I believe they're both regular season. I'll have to double check that. Maybe someone in the chat can confirm. But I'm under the impression that both are regular season games to start the year in Prague, which is also it's a shame that those 2 teams are playing in Prague, because that would have been a great Lindy Ruff revenge story in the States.
I look forward to hearing you talk about, and you'll probably wear an Islanders jersey when we do the Metro division, because we know that you're changing your New York allegiances. You're very slowly changing your New York allegiances. If you haven't liked or subscribed to to our YouTube channel, make sure you do that. You guys really, were great last year. I think the more you guys like our episodes, the farther up the algorithm they get, the more views they get, the more our advertisers, do deals with us, which allows us to continue to grow the show. Obviously, today is just our first episode back. So, we hope you're happy to see us back. We're certainly happy to have you guys back live in the chat. As I said right off the top, it was definitely not as fun this summer, pre-recording episodes and like the middle of random days and then playing them a few days later. It's just kind of not really our style. So good to have everybody back. Good to be back. Make sure you give us a like, give us a subscribe, put us on your downloads on podcasting, on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. If you do miss the show, these things age pretty quickly here. So make sure you get the recording. Vic gets them onto those platforms really quickly when we're done. So obviously, J-Rock said Colby missed us. I did. I missed.
To be clear, he missed you guys, not me.
I definitely didn't miss Johnny. This morning I woke up to like 17 texts from Johnny, and all I could say back to him was, like, I can't believe I have to start dealing with this again with you. So that's all I have. Johnny, I don't know if you want the final word before we say we'll see everybody tomorrow.
Nope. Great first day. Great to be back. Love you guys. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe